So the juror for the language of color was Gail Fletcher, who's a photo editor for The Guardian. Gail, as I mentioned, she's a photo editor for The Guardian, where she develops and produces visual stories. She is also on faculty at the International Center of Photography and was previously an associate photo editor at National Geographic. She has served as a juror for the Alexia Grant, Reviews Santa Fe, American Photography, and others, and she regularly reviews portfolios to help photographers and artists refine their best work. She's originally from South Florida, but she's now based in Brooklyn, New York. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to, where did Gail go?
Here, if you can see me.
Oh, there you are. Okay. I'm going to pin you and I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, I mean, now I'm not sure what to say for my bio because it's probably the same as what you said. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to say that I'm from Florida, so I always have a soft spot in my heart for the South. I miss it, even though it feels like the South right now with this New York City heat. It's almost 100 degrees today, and there's not the same AC in New York like there is in the South, so we're definitely suffering here a little bit, but hopefully it cools down soon. I wanted to thank David and APG for inviting me to Jur all of your work, the submissions. I am always so grateful to do that. It's so helpful for me in my own work because it introduces me to new people, to new work, to new voices. So I really enjoyed going through all of your submissions, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about yourselves and your practice and what brought you to create these images that are in the exhibit today. Is there anything else I should say, David? Or I can tell you, yeah, is there anything else I should say, or should we?
Yeah, if you want to maybe talk a little bit like what you do in your day-to-day job.
Yeah, so in my day-to-day, I commission photographers all across the US. So I work with The Guardian, which is a UK publication, but they have outlets in the US and Australia, and they've just made, or maybe about a year or two ago, they've made an edition to cover Europe. So I work in the US office, and within the US, I work in the New York office, and I cover all of the US. So I don't have any particular beat, so I don't work on just environment or just politics, but I work on everything that's happening in the region. And it's been a very, very busy 4 years since I've been here, or nearly 4 years. Every time I think there's gonna be a slow day, something happens. So news never stops. It's very much a different environment from National Geographic, where I was, where that's a slower pace magazine style. You have all the time in the world, probably like a year, 2 or 3 sometimes to contemplate a story. And when you work in news, it's much faster. Sometimes you have 3 minutes to contemplate a story. So definitely not as much time. And in my day to day, when it comes to commissioning photographers, sometimes I'll pick up pitches from photographers, like for photo essays. Most of the time, stories are originating from the reporter or the editor, and then they'll come to me, they'll come to other photo editors at The Guardian for us to think about how to tell this story visually. And that is a really exciting challenge for all of us because photography is such a powerful medium to get issues of the US, issues of the world across into our audiences. So I work to source photographers, and I find photographers in so many different ways, including on through um being on a jury, like for APG. Like David said, I like to review portfolios, and I also am always looking out for interesting work at museums or interesting work that I see in other outlets. Or social media is a huge, huge part of my job, unfortunately, because I definitely have an addictive personality. So I wish I didn't have to be on Instagram all the time, but it's just the nature of the job. So I definitely find so many people in so many different ways. So yeah, I'm glad to be introduced to all of you and looking forward to learning more.
So let me ask, so Do you have like a book of photographers that you kind of are working through as you are also adding in new people? And do you have kind of people placed by region, or is it this sort of kind of subject matter that these different photographers work in, or a combination, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I definitely have informal list going. I use an Airtable, which is similar to a Google Sheets or Excel, where I will write down the names of photographer by city and state. I had to learn very quickly when I started at The Guardian because I primarily work with local photographers, which is different from how I worked at Nat Geo, or we'll send somebody to cover many different places. And at The Guardian, our budgets are much smaller, so we're not really flying people anywhere. We're not getting them visas to go to a different country. So I had to really learn about the local photography communities across the US. And I just over the years have just kept a running list on my Airtable that has now like exceeded the free limit. So now I go through a Google document where I'll just jot down names of anyone whose work was interesting to me, especially if they're in locations that are much smaller markets. So, like, if they're in New York, if they're in LA, if I really like their work, I'll jot their names down. But if they're in Iowa, if they're in Idaho, North Dakota, I'll absolutely jot their names down because they're just smaller markets. And so that's one way, like I'll keep tabs on photographers. We also like have our own system within the Guardian where I can type in a location if I need somebody somewhere, and then a lot of or all of that work from that area will come up, and I can see who photographed those stories to see if they're the right fit for that particular story that I need to assign. And yeah, many people I would say just have a running list, like an informal running list. Some people save photographers on their Instagram pages. Some publications have a more formal database. I also use like databases as well to source photographers, and there's like a informal photo editors group where we'll ask for recommendations. So there's many, many different ways that I can find somebody for a story.
When you do source work out to someone, because the news is happening so fast, from the time that you assign a photo assignment to someone to the time that you're expected the work to come to you, what sort of time or what's the lead time on that?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I'm not working in breaking news. When it comes to breaking news, because we are relatively a smaller outlet, we tend to not assign breaking news photography as opposed to places like the New York Times or the Washington Post, where they have a lot of staff photographers, or they frankly just have a lot more money to assign people and a lot more staffing and resources. So we will tend to go to the wire agencies like AP, like Reuters, like Getty Images, if we need breaking news photography. So I usually don't need to ask photographers to file images very quickly, with the exception of some major events that we can anticipate, like the elections, like military parades, like any event that we know is coming. So the turnaround time can range from I might need like short is if I need it the next day. I would say fortunately that's pretty rare, but usually I try to give photographers as much time as possible to really be able to sit with their work, to go through their edit, to tone their images, to caption their images, which is so important, and um prepare them so that when they do file them to me, I'll have what I need and I'll have the best images. So that like probably like a week, sometimes longer if this story is not going to publish for a while. I try to just keep them posted on when the stories are going to publish, so I don't need to make people rush if it's not necessary for there to be a rush.
Well, great. That's really fascinating. It's like I've often wondered about like how all that operates, and
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, We're going to have a section at the end, kind of a general Q&A. So if anybody that's on the call has questions about you and what you do, or your curation process or your work process, they'll be able to ask those at the end of the call. So what I'm going to do now is, like, see, I'm going to unpin you. Where do I do that? Okay, remove pin. Okay. And I'm going to go back to sharing my deck. Share. Okay, everybody's back on that again. And moving on. So these are the artist and the work, which is Language of Color 2025. And I have to say before we get started, it's always interesting as the prints are coming in. We see the thumbnails, we see these things that are like, maybe as big as a medium-sized format and negative. And that's kind of what we're working with. And then the prints start coming in, and a lot of times they're boxed up. And so we're really not seeing everything until we start laying out the show and we get it up on the wall. And once we got this show up on the wall, it's like, wow, this show looks really, really good. The images all like kind of talk to each other really well, and it was a joy to lay it out. And so you did a fantastic job curating the show. It looks really good in the gallery. These are our featured artists that are in the show. So congratulations to all of you who are exhibiting work. Okay, Anirudh, you are up first with your sword lifting piece. So tell us about this work.
Yes. Yeah. Hi, my name is Anirudh Nayak. Right now I'm pursuing Master of Fine Arts in Photography at the Savannah College of Art and Design, Atlanta. So this photograph, titled Sword Lifting, is captured during a festival in India back in 2023 June. This is about a shepherd community. So people of the shepherd community, they come together for this festival, annual festival, and the person who's lifting the sword, he is like a descendant of God, and he's like a messenger of the God. So what he does is like he predict the upcoming year, how it's going to be the climate, the crop, and more like business and farming and everything, and he predicts and he tell everything to the people. The main thing about the festival is the turmeric powder, though the celebration of this is with the turmeric powder, the whole celebration. So the reincarnation of the god Vishnu, and the sword lifting is the main type, like time of the festival, which happens like which he goes into trance, like the god is in him, and he lift the sword and he do like something like this. So this is the very moment of the festival. So I was there. I was like doing research and everything before I go to the festival, and I captured one of this. Yeah, this is about the image.
So the yellow color in the image is the turmeric.
Yes, it's a turmeric powder, but it's not like it's a soft turmeric, which like not harmful, or like if it goes into eyes or anywhere, it doesn't harm.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm a documentary and fine art photographer. Back in India, I love to go to the festivals. I have covered like 10, 15 biggest festivals in India, do documentaries about them and the festival in detail, the manifestations, the facts, the impacts of the festivals. So this is one of festival I've covered.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
this image definitely, I mean, it's so striking, this golden yellow color. So definitely caught
Yeah,
my eye. And I also love this like dichotomy between it feels very traditional with this
yeah,
festival, but also there, it also is very contemporary because you can see the spectacle of it and everyone with their like iPhones. So I thought this was very
yeah,
like I also liked how you cropped in really tight for this frame. So many
Yeah,
layers to this frame, which I'm always intrigued by.
thank you.
Up next, we have Brian Galgano, who has two works in the show. And the first one up here is Breakfast Anytime. So, Brian, oh, and real quick before I get going here, if people have questions that uh, if you want to ask them in the Q&A at the end, you can. If you would rather just put them into chat, feel free to do that, and I can ask them in the Q&A for you at the end. Um, I I sent out an email this morning asking people if they were going to be on the call and if they wanted to talk. And so while I'm going through these, the only people I'm calling on to speak are the people that got back to me. If for some reason you either missed the email or didn't have a chance to get back to me, just drop a note in chat that you want to talk about your photo, and I'll get you added to the list and make sure I call on you. So back to you, Brian.
Thank you. And obviously, I agree wholeheartedly with David about the show, and the gallery looks amazing, and I'm pretty excited to be a part of it. And both these images are actually part of the same little project I've been doing. I've been thinking a lot about how my thoughts and my habits and are sometimes not so great for me. There's some doom scrolling and some negative habits that I have, and I've been thinking also a lot about the word reprieve as a pause from punishment. And I've been going around and really taking in places that are a reprieve for me in my daily life. So obviously the Waffle House is a staple in the South, and it's a even though sometimes it's not a quiet place, it's a great place. And so I just started to find these quiet and not so quiet and ordinary places that bring stillness to me, and bring me like a daily reprieve in that way. And that the second image, obviously being a church, is a place for me for many reasons that I enjoy, and brings me that sort of stillness in my mind. And yeah, so I really, and that's just what I would try to bring forth in some of these images in that project that I'm doing.
Great. And the other image that you had in the show is this one called Sanctuary.
And had I known they were going to be, I didn't obviously know that had I known they'd be picked together, I definitely would have named them the two cathedrals because of how important the Waffle House is to the South and as a nod to the West Wing.
Yeah, I just have to say the Waffle House image was so Nighthawks-esque with that Edward Hopper painting. I mean, I don't know if that was intentional, but it feels like an homage to that. And it was interesting to hear your reflections on just stillness and quiet. And I think we've all been there at, yeah, the late hours. And it's just you're feeling a little bit delirious, a little bit like what's going on. And yeah, I mean, it's come through in this image.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And next up is Christian Wayne. Are you, are you with us, Christian? Okay. He had emailed that he was going to be on. Okay, well, we will come back to him. This work is by Courtney Griever Fries called Blushing. And this one here is by Cynthia Ayub Harris, At the End of the Blue Path. So, Cynthia, would you like to tell us about this image and also the other one that you have in the show? Oh, looks like Cynthia did not make it to the call. Okay. So her other piece was this one called A Red Truck. This work here is one of two by Dale Niles. This one is called Private Property. And this one is called Temptation. I hadn't noticed it before, but the stem on the apple is almost kind of like a little bitty of a like a little snake popping out there. And then next up is David Hedges with his piece called Four Circles. So David, you are up.
All righty. Well, to keep myself organized, I'm just going to read a little bit from my artist statement. In my formalistic approach to photography, the subject's line, shape, form, and structure are the story. These abstracted forms, creases, crevices, gradients of light, and the shadow draw me in. No meaning is implied or inferred with these abstractions. The intentionality is to make an impactful image and let the observer create a storyline or not. In The Edge of Vision, Lyle Rexer writes, the abstract photograph signifies not the given, but the possible. So my possible comes from asking questions. So Gail, my question to you is, as a photo editor, you see thousands of images and are always making evaluations and corrections immediately. So looking at this image, what is the first thing you would say to me? Hey, Dave, I would have changed.
Ooh, I don't know if I could say what you should change. I know that's probably a cop-out answer, but I do feel like when it comes to abstract images, which I'm really I'm drawn to abstract art, abstract photography. It's really about like how you said it. It's really about what feelings they evoke. And this one brings me a bit of I mean, this one it's like it feels like movement and fluidity and it's a little bit eerie as well. So I would say I wouldn't change anything because when it comes to abstract forms, I think you have to kind of at some point let that flow naturally. But I can tell you what it evokes for me, which is movement, a little bit of eeriness with the shadows
Mhm.
and yeah. I don't know if that's a cop-out answer, but I wouldn't say to change anything. I appreciate the form and I appreciate what you're doing with the light and shadow here and the colors, of course.
Right. Well, with my stuff, I'm always second guessing myself, even to the point where I hit send. What could I have done different? So I guess that's what I'm looking for. Maybe another idea, maybe another artist you've seen that does the same thing that I might look at, or just ideas in the
Yeah.
short time that we have.
Oof, I mean, less so photographer, but the artist that's coming to mind for me is like the artist I always think about when it comes to abstract art is like very immersive abstract art is Rothko.
Yeah,
And I maybe for you I'd consider making these larger scale in prints, and I think that can really immerse a viewer and yeah, I mean, maybe consider the size of the images. I know this is like a digital space, so of course it's going to be small on our screen, but I always appreciated that immersive experience that I get when I'm looking at a Rothko painting, and I wonder if you can consider that for your own projects.
absolutely. Yep, he's a good one. So this is where I go. This is where I live. So I don't do people. But anyway, yep. But these are simply forms I create in front of one of my windows. Those are the color comes from plastic gels that
Oh, nice.
I paste up to the window, and then I find these are just cardboard tubes that I put there and just play with until I find something that seems to work.
What when you find something that works, what do you feel? Like when do you feel like it's working?
Something that draws me in, something that's different. I have a friend that looks at my work sometimes and she'll say, okay, we have all of these great pictures, but say to your pictures, so what?
Mhm.
And another person that looks at my stuff will say, surprise me. So when I pick up the camera, when I'm editing, those two words, phrases always come to me. So what and surprise me. So that's what I'm looking for.
It's a good metric.
So thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
sharing.
you. And next up, we have Deborah Barnhart with her photograph, Danny Reading. So Deborah, the floor is yours.
I think you're on mute, Deborah.
Thank you, Gail, for selecting this piece. I really appreciate it. So I was at the Southeastern Railway Museum on a photo shoot with the Atlanta School of Photography, and it was kind of a 60s styles retro dress. And frankly, I was well, I love photographing people. I want to say that to David. It's my thing. But with a lot of the models, I was like, oh, okay. And so when I got to Danny, she was a wonderful model. And she picked up this magazine as a prop. And I couldn't help but see the irony in it, that she is a beautiful Black woman holding a magazine with a blonde white starlet on the cover. And that is what interested me, that and the lines. More than that, I don't know how to speak to this issue. I know I showed this photo to a friend who's Black, and he said, oh, that's passé. I don't know. Is it? Certainly in terms of what we see in magazines, things have changed drastically, especially in fashion magazines and such. But I don't know. I don't know how else to speak to this. For me, it was the irony of it. And so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Gail.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize that in your work when you say it. What drew me into this image, I was struck by this timeless aspect of it. I didn't know kind of the background of what was going on here, but I felt like this could have been photographed in the 60s or it could have been photographed today. So I really like images that confuse me a little bit and I'm like, what's going on here? And like you're saying, like there's just, and what I was saying before, just I always appreciate images that have layers to it, where it's like, okay, when was this photograph made? And then this, like what you're saying too about her reading Life magazine and who's the cover star on this, and what Black people were going through at that time, and like whose stories are told in that way. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a layered image. So I was drawn to the timelessness aspect of it, but I also see just this kind of tension in this image as well that you're saying.
And the symbolic nature of it. Yeah.
Yeah, when you showed me the image, Deborah, the first time, it reminded me of the exhibition
Yes.
of Gordon Parks' work when he shot for, I think it was for Life magazine in the South. It kind of had a threw me back to those.
Yeah, it's definitely Gordon Parks ass, yeah. And I love his work, of course.
Oh, thank you for the comparison.
Okay, so this piece here is by Eric Burkhardt called Frizzle's Outing, and Eric is unable to be here tonight. This piece is by Gatel Price called Shattered Dreams. And next up, we have two works by Jenny Lynn Pawelski. And this first one here is Blue Dress and a Flower Moon. So Jenny, you want to tell us about this image?
Hi, my name is Jenny Lynn Pawelski, and I'm from Savannah, Georgia. And I do want to say thank you to you, David, and APG for continuing to support photography and photographers. We really need y'all now more than ever. And thank you, Gail, for selecting my images for this exhibition. This photo was taken as part of a monthly practice that I have where I try to photograph the rising full moon. I do it most months if the weather permits, and I've been doing it for years now. And it's really sort of meditative practice and a reason to kind of get outside. And sometimes I come away with good images and sometimes I don't. This particular evening, I was out on Tybee Island, which is off the coast of Georgia, and I had already made my shots of the moon itself as it was coming up over the horizon, and I was sort of kind of strolling down the beach, and I saw these two women, and the first thing that I noticed was just these sort of gorgeous blues in their dresses and how it was blue hour, it was that sort of twilighty time, and there's, the ocean and stuff. And I stopped and just made a few quick photos. My approach to photography is sort of a hybrid of street photography and documentary photography. So the street photography is a little bit more kind of grab some images in the moment. The documentary side of me is stop and chat and get people's stories and maybe come back another time or a third time. But this one was just a couple of quick images, and I kept walking. And then later, when I was asking for some feedback, trying to decide between these two frames that I had in mind, this one, somebody commented that they really liked how the figures seem connected, how they're almost sort of bowing towards each other. Um, and I just really like the sort of lushness of their feet and the wet sand. And then even how like when their dresses get wet, we get like yet another shade of blue. And recently I saw a photo that somebody else had taken that was so similar to this one, and I wish that I had screenshot it because it just seemed like one of those kind of collective consciousness moments that I was super into. And so if anybody has seen a photographer with an image that's similar than this, please tell me, because I would have loved to have studied it more. Um, let's see. Want to go to the next one?
Yeah.
Um, so this photo was made back in December. I had been noticing for a while there was this sort of small home that was directly across from the new arena that was built on the west side of Savannah. And this home was like the only home that was left in this area, in this neighborhood. And it was like in a real stark contrast with the arena across the street. And I had been really wondering who was living in this home. And I guess I had projected like a lot of feelings on whoever was living there, because I was thinking like, man, I would really hate this. Just all the construction and then all of the disturbance as a result of people coming and going from the arena. And one day when I was driving by, all of these really bright, colorful Christmas garlands were all sparkling and caught my eye. And then I realized that Mr. Nelson was out decorating his home. And so I stopped to chat with him a little bit. And I was in a bit of a time crunch on that day. So then I asked him if I could come back a second time, which is when I made this portrait and a few others. And as this, I would say, kind of maybe falls a little bit more into the documentary side of my work, where I really do, I really want to hear people's stories and people's perspectives. That's a big part of uh, what draws me into this kind of work. Um, I'm a pretty curious person about stories, and I kind of feel like maybe this is a reference back to the previous image that we saw, but I always felt like I was like born too late to be like a Life magazine photographer. But it's just something that I really have always loved since I was a child. And and the opportunity to hear a story about someone that you wouldn't have known before. And so without going too far down the rabbit hole of Mr. Nelson's particular story, but he's been living in this home since the 1950s. So his parents built it originally. He's been living there since he was a teenager. And so he's seen a lot of change over the years. And was telling me all these stories about Savannah history, and how the the spot where this big arena is right now is like back in the old days was like a field with watermelon and corn, and um there were other homes on this block, of course. But he is really is takes these changes in stride, and has found sort of an entertainment value in having this arena, because he's got some kind of special access. He can take his grandkids to monster trucks. He can put up a sign and have people pay him to park behind his house when he feels like it. And he really seems to sort of relish these kind of human interactions, people like me that are curious, that are coming up wanting to hear his story. So, I walked away from that encounter feeling like I really learned something about preconceived notions, uh, making sort of assumptions, but also his sort of um, I mean, man, he had a lot of interesting things to say. We talked a lot about aging, and he was saying, take care of your body and your body will take care of you, which I really took that one to heart. Couldn't agree more. But also just this idea that life can be what you make of it. And so not to, I guess, sugarcoat, someone else could be in that home and have had a completely different reaction to it, but it's sort of this idea of um, kind of rolling with the changes, and his sort of outlook. So I felt like I learned a lot from him. And I really love this photo. If you look at it bigger, there's sort of a detail that there's a family portrait that's on the wall on the other side of the storm door, which you can see when it's a little bit bigger. And that's kind of one of my favorite details of this image.
Yeah, they're both so lovely, and they're both so different too. So it's interesting hearing you talk about your two different styles of photography, and I think they come across in these two images. I really liked his just striking expression and his directness in this frame and his body language. I know this is about color, which we can get to, but his body language too is it's hearing his backstory. I could just like see even in his expression and his body language just his resilience, and now knowing kind of what's happening in the background is yeah, really it's it's you've been able you're kind of able to show his story just with this portrait with which is really hard to do. And I didn't even notice that detail in the background looking at it on my computer screen, but that's really amazing to show that history as well. And then of course, like these fun Christmas decorations, these frilly, I don't even know what you call them, but it's nice seeing a joyous image. I think there's also joy in this image and peace. So yeah, I liked that aspect of that frame. And then going back to the image you made on the beach, I yeah, I mean the shades of hue were of blue, sorry, the shades of blue were so like calming and tranquil, which is often like the description of how you describe blues. And I was just really wondering so much about these two women and their story. I'm not sure if they're like Amish, Mennonite, but they seem to like have they seem to be at peace in this image as well. And I'm so drawn to them in this frame. And I wonder so much about like how they got here, what their lives are like. You don't often see um, people from their community in this sort of setting, so it's nice showing them in a different environment to show like the full lives that they have. So um, this one leaves me very curious about what their lives are like and what brought them to the beach.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think I think in the kind of work that I do, there's always, you kind of have to make a call sometimes whether or not you want to interrupt people and kind of chat them up, or you want to let them just enjoy their evening
Mm.
without, inserting yourself. And, it's just that, and that's always a challenge for me because, later sometimes you do think, man, I wish that I had chatted and gotten more of that story. Um, and like you, I would assume that they're Mennonite, but I don't like to assume things like that because I don't really know for sure. Um, but they were definitely enjoying the evening, and so like I said, it was hard to resist getting a couple of quick frames and then sort of moving on and letting them um kind of lose themselves in the moment without me interrupting. But yes, thank you for that commentary. It's really uh this is such a great opportunity through APG and with all the jurors that give us our time to just like chat about photos and photography and all that. So again, just really appreciate y'all giving us this opportunity.
Yeah. And one last thing about this image, I think the mysteriousness works a lot. I mean, I can think of so many paintings and images throughout history that we just don't know their stories, but there's been books and movies trying to figure out and interpret what their story is, and this image does that for me. So mystery is it's a good thing a lot of times too. So yeah, I mean, I understand not having that desire to really interfere with this moment of peace that these women are having. And I think that's okay. And it just leaves us wanting to know more. And sometimes we just have to be left with that and not interfere in the situation.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, this is an image I definitely enjoy spending time with in the gallery. It looks like it could be like it could make a great art house movie poster. You know,
Mm.
it looks like a beautiful scene from a gorgeous movie. Uh,
I have watched a lot of art house films, so maybe that's like indirectly
Sinking in
influencing my
on you.
image making.
So next up, we've got another artist who has two works in the show, and that's Josh Booth. And this first one is named
Hello.
Hey everyone. So Gail, thanks again for choosing a couple of my pieces. I was super excited to have a couple selected. This one, honestly, it was kind of surprising. This one was almost kind of entered in as an afterthought. I took this back in 2014 at the top of a mountain in Costa Rica and just happened to be shooting out. We had taken like an ATV tour up, and we were just kind of sitting at the top of this mountain, and I just kind of photographed out. And this particular area is where a lot of the I think it's like whales go to calf during the season. It's in the area kind of the South Pacific side of Costa Rica called Avita. And we just happened to be there. My wife and I went there. It was kind of a late honeymoon back in 2014. And I took this shot, and I love the fact that there's just all these kind of subtle hues that you kind of tend to lose. Where is the horizon in this shot? Um, and typically, my style of work tends to really isolate out a subject. I like to be very simple. I like to have lots of negative space. And there still is that element of negative space in this photograph with kind of the clouds, but you still kind of lose kind of where you're at in this particular photograph. So Gail, if you have anything you don't pipe in on, please feel free to say something that kind of struck you about this image. But yeah, I was really surprised that this was one of them that got chosen. So I was really excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably like I'm not a brand ambassador for Rothko at all, but I think it's still really he was like probably my first introduction into like just large scale abstract art, and I really appreciate that feeling of just immersing yourself into this like negative space and the yeah, just the serenity that this image brings to me. I really like it. It feels very painterly and it
Hmm.
almost doesn't feel like a photograph. It's like yeah, it could be painting, it could be like digital art, but it's a digital image, and I really just like it brought me calm. It brought me calm.
Yeah, and I find that's kind of a theme for a lot of my work, and someone was talking about that earlier. I think it was Brian, and he's talking about um, kind of a sense of peace. I forget the word he used now; it's escaping me, but this idea of stillness almost is kind of a theme within my work, and that's often. I mean, I'm so ADHD. I'm all over the place. I've got a million things going on in my head all at the same time, and a photograph to me allows me just to kind of stop for a moment, and especially because I like to theme around a lot of my work around nature photography. I got my background early on in doing kind of humanitarian efforts. My first time I'd ever photographed anything with people in it, I was actually in Iraq during the war, working with an aid organization doing photography for them. And that's when I knew I wanted to do photography. And I've kind of now that I've got wife and kids, they don't tend to want me to run off to war zones, so I stick to more nature stuff now. And um, so that's kind of where I'm at. The
Yeah,
next piece, go ahead.
oh, you bring up an interesting point. I wonder if that's why I also am so personally drawn to these quiet and still images because my day to day is just looking at just chaos in the world.
Yeah,
And that's why I really love, yeah, I really love images that don't have so much action immediately and something more like this.
yeah.
It's
There's more
just
like subtlety to it. Yeah.
like I always joke that I actually have nothing on the walls in my apartment because I have to look at all day that I just use like white walls to keep
It's
myself,
fair.
yeah,
It's
just
fair and
like
understandable.
cleanse myself. And yeah, this feels like a good cleanse to me.
The next image, going back to what you commented on earlier, is focusing in on the size, and this was one of those that like I absolutely could not wait to get into something. I wanted to print it, and right now this one's printed as big as we could possibly get it for this show. So this is printed at 32 by 32. And it's this little 1 inch helicopter seed that I found outside. And I've been kind of eyeballing wanting to shoot something like this for a couple of days. I was actually in the middle of preparing to teach a Capture One seminar for a local, for Fuji, actually. Fuji was releasing a new camera. They wanted to do a Capture One event here in Atlanta. And so I was going to be teaching a seminar, but I needed more Fuji shots. And so I happened to grab a 100 megapixel Fuji camera from Capture Integration that week to kind of play around with and get some shots that I could use. And I was out throwing the ball with my dog. I've got a small German short-haired pointer puppy. You just have to run constantly. And I looked down and I saw this thing. It was like almost completely perfect helicopter seed just sitting in the street. It is far enough away from the maple tree that we had in our yard, but I saw this and I just knew I had to photograph. And again, I photographed it also with a Canon camera with a 100 megapixel or with a 100 millimeter macro, excuse me. But the color, just the subtle color variations were picked up so much better on that 100 megapixel sensor. The sensors are just bigger. The physics of it allow for a higher bit depth, and they can just capture color more vibrantly. And again, this kind of comes back to almost that same kind of pairing with that first image, is that there's such subtle color variations in this image that again, it almost causes you to stop and be still. And then kind of contemplate the whole like life and growth and life and death and all of that. And we've got this kind of idea of symmetry and non-symmetry that kind of goes on with this image. But those are just a little bit of the things that roll around in my head. But really, when you stop and try to look at all the intricacies of the color and the veins, it just slows me down and allows me to stop and think for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, macro photography, it's so like my explanation or just my comment is so basic, but I find it so beautiful because it really makes you appreciate just the small things that
Hmm.
are all around you in nature and how much we pass by every day because we're probably just like on our phones and not really appreciating such a beautiful form like this. And I also like this also feels like an insect or a butterfly and just this interesting mimicry thing going on. So
Hmm.
I'm a sucker for macro photography because I think it reminds us that nature, even however small it is so beautiful.
Yeah, it helps us to know the details that we kind of tend to overlook on the day to day, and that's a lot of what my work tries to focus on is what can we see that nobody else sees, and how can we kind of bring that to light. Like I heard someone say one time that, whatever you call God, we're all kind of created in an aspect to see one side of it, and it's our job to show that one side, and to kind of reflect that to the people around us. So, um, but again, thank you again so much for your input and for choosing these images.
Of course.
Yeah, this one looks great at 32 by 32. All right, next up with two images as well is Kaylin Gilstrap. And so, Kaylin, tell us about your two images.
Hi, everybody. I guess the first place I should start. My name is Kaylin Gilstrap. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I primarily photograph people in my job. So on personal projects, I like to step away, and I'm really grateful that these two images were chosen from this project. It's a newer project. I'm about a year in, and the whole idea was I just wanted to go to my childhood home and play with bubbles. And I really, if you want to release your sense of control, bubbles are a fantastic subject because you have so little control, and environment can change them greatly. How much wind, how hot it is, how cold it is. The formula, I test the formula pretty rigorously. Yeah, and I just am always testing that out. So, but the whole idea was that I would just play, and then as I just demonstrated, I got really nerdy about bubbles. Um, and this one is, none of this was modified with Photoshop except a little saturation in the bubble, and that's just a little bit of saturation. Otherwise, it just created kind of this ghost apparition. But especially growing up in the arid desert, which is where this is, I was really drawn to the contrast I started noticing from these images of these really playful things with a really dried out background. Yeah, and I think obviously when I was thinking about photographing bubbles, it would be that actual form. But as you keep going and the project expands, I started noticing the rainbow shadows that the bubbles would create. And like I said, growing up in this area, I was always very aware of just the joyfulness of water and then the excruciating agony of its absence. And that's kind of what I have been playing with this project.
Yeah, these are also so lovely. I really like this iridescence in these two images. And looking at the one before, I was like, wow, that looks like an alien. I think Moni, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. You also said the same thing. Yeah, I love the iridescence. I loved these feel like two like images that could lead in a story about the environmental crisis and what we're doing without having like an image of like the burning Palisades or something that might be more predictable. But yeah, the iridescence in this arid landscape I thought was this really interesting and beautiful combination.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes if you present an idea in a beautiful manner, it makes it, I hate to say it, easier for folks to sit with, but all of a sudden you may engage it longer. And it's funny, Gail, because like this was just meant to be like a willingness to play, but uh, you know, in the creation, I just started noticing more of a story.
Nice.
Thank you. And Kaylin also has work in the Focus show as well. So if you come down to the gallery, you'll get to see her work in both galleries.
Yeah, thank you, David.
All right. And next up is Lynn Seville with two of her works. So Lynn, you want to take it away?
Hi, thank you, David. Thank you, Gail, for including two of my prints in the show. I was very excited when I saw that you were curating a show on color because it seems like something that really motivates me. For a long time, I've been drawn to photographing urban landscape at twilight. I live in New York City, actually, but I come from the South. I'm from North Carolina, and I certainly appreciate twilight in the South as well as twilight in the city. But what attracts me about this particular place where I photographed, there was a time a few years ago when the city, a new building was being built right next to Grand Central Station, and the realtors, or the construction people completely demolished an entire block of the city, which caused people to be very people to be able to see Grand Central very beautifully from a block away because it wasn't hidden by other buildings. It was like out in the open because it's a smaller building than other buildings. And beyond Grand Central, from if you're on the west looking east, you could see Chrysler Building, which is this building in the reflection. And I started photographing the process of them demolishing and then building up the new building, which is now taller than the Empire State Building. It's One Vanderbilt. And so this reflection is no longer possible because it would be blocked by the building. But because there was nothing across the street, this was visible. I hadn't noticed it before, so it wasn't like I was waiting for something to change. But one thing that I've appreciated by living in the city is constant change. And sometimes I've resisted when a lot of glass buildings come up and things change. But I realized that I love the city and love photographing so much that I should try not to get mad at it, but try to just be open and see what I see. And I'm so glad I kind of made that executive decision artistically, because I see so many things in the glass buildings that has amused me, interested me, and just made me appreciate, for example, this moment when I was walking down Madison Avenue and there were those mannequins who looked like they were sort of looking up at something in the sky. And then there was the Chrysler Building with this sort of beautiful violet and twilight clouds and sky. It was also kind of wiggling its hips, because that's what happens in these big glass buildings. There's this sway, and so things, although it may seem during certain times of the day that the glass buildings are very sanitized or cold, or they don't have the same warmth as like a cast iron building, even, with the old windows and the details and so forth. But in fact, they are very playful. You see things in them. So I really appreciated that, and the interaction between the mannequins and the sky. And the other thing is, at twilight in terms of the color is that artificial lights, as most of you know, are often warm. So as it starts getting dark, the artificial lights become more significant or balance the natural light. And then later, of course, it gets much darker and the artificial lights are raining, so to speak. But this was a true landscape for me because in the foreground at the bottom, you see the street, which for me is the kind of the dirt, you know, it's like the land of the city. And then the artificial lights and then the sky. And then those lights, other reflections of those little lights, or maybe they're lights emanating from inside the building, but they almost become kind of like stars or something. I don't know, I just really appreciate this sort of thing that happens. So if you want me to look at the other, oh yeah, thank you. Thanks for choosing too. And it's funny, I've often not pay that much attention to construction sites. But over COVID, I was going to a lot of elevated subways and appreciating anything I could see. I mean, it was kind of like my road trip to get away from the apartment. And so I got in the habit of going to elevated subways and just getting out, looking around and getting back on. And so this actually, I took after COVID, it was only about a year or so ago, and they were constructing this building right near Queensboro Plaza. And I just thought it looked so beautiful with those kind of, you know, hazard diagonals boldly on that old fencing, which is part of the, you know, it's between the tracks and the street, which is far below. And then this really interesting grid where you sort of see in like a doll's house of like little things, you know, different aspects of the construction. Maybe the people are working in the ones that are lit and, you know, they just have different lighting in the blue ones. But so that's what drew me to this. And it's kind of is amusing to me because I always kind of like curvy pictures, I mean, curvy architecture. And this was so abstract that kind of intrigued me. So thanks, Gail.
I mean, this image is so beautiful. I'm like you, I have complicated feelings about development, about industrialization in New York. I think it's can look so ugly. And I appreciated how this image made it look beautiful, made me rethink development a little bit. I don't think I've ever seen an image that looks so like makes development in New York look so just alluring. So kudos to you for that.
Well, thank you. Well, it's kind of like I saw it and then I went back. I was thinking, well, you know how like you see something out of the corner of your eye and you think, well, that is cool, but then you forget about it. But it
Yeah.
just kept coming to me. It's not on my regular route, so I kind of had to travel to get there. But I did because I remembered, wow, that was pretty beautiful as a
Yeah, and
place.
on the subway platform. I was curious about the vantage point, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah, right on that platform. There's a lot to be seen on a number of the elevated subways, as you probably know.
yeah. Sometimes you see too much. Sometimes I feel for the people who are working and living right by the subway system, but no, this one's beautiful. And the one before that I thought just felt so New York, which I loved. And yeah, I
Thank
mean,
you.
going back to that like quiet in a city that is never really quiet. It's really serene and complex too because you think about these massive buildings. This shows wealth. This shows emptiness too, which is just an odd combination as well. That I mean, there's a lot of money in this building. There's a lot of space in this building in a city that still is in need of that as well. So yeah, I mean, this image to me felt so New York, which I really liked.
Thank you.
Yeah, Gail, if you're familiar, excuse me, with the Yancey Richardson
Yeah.
gallery, Lynn shows work with her and is um, not this most recent APAD, but the one before that, Yancey did a show of Lynn's work, of different things that she had taken from the platforms in New York. It was a really beautiful show.
Thank you.
Cool. I'll check it out.
Thank you.
All right. And this work here is by Marcos Oscar Lopez called Chromium. Here. This work is by Mark McCarty, Southwest Cove, number 3984. And the next work up is by Marla Puzis, The Girl and the Toad. And so Marla, would you like to tell us about this photo?
Yes, and thanks for organizing this exhibit, and thanks to Gail for choosing this photo. This young girl is the granddaughter of good friends of mine and my husband's, who live in I think a 200-year-old farmhouse in Carlton, Georgia, which is north and east of Athens. And we were there for a house party with a potluck and dancing. And as soon as we parked the car and got out, I saw their granddaughter on the lawn holding a toad. And she's kind of a wild child. They have acres of woods on their land, and she likes to run around the woods. She climbs trees. She hangs upside down from the trees. And anyway, I thought, I asked her if I could take her picture, and because I thought, wow, the colors in her jumpsuit and her expression, and her skin, how, sort of creamy it is, almost like a Renaissance painting. So she agreed and posed for me with her toad that she had just captured moments before. So that's the picture. And generally, I also really like to photograph people, and particularly, I guess what you would call environmental portraits of people kind of in their environments, whether it's at their home or workplace or out on a farm or in the woods or wherever. I think it's just kind of, I like to situate people in the world and do it with natural lighting. I don't, do studio photography or anything like that. So I'm very pleased with it. And her mother and grandmother both kindly agreed to allow me to exhibit the photo. So I'm very grateful. So thanks.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And to me, this image just says innocence back to nature, which is nice in a world where all of the kids are on TikTok and their phones. So I love seeing a kid outside of that kind of element, and it was nice to see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marla. This piece was by Melanie Brown called My Favorite Color is Green, but I'm So Blue, number 2. The next work up is by Money Nation. It's called Pink Resonance 2. And Money, would you like to tell us about this image?
Hey there, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you, Gail, for choosing this image, and APG for doing color again. I love color. So I will just read what I wrote about it, because it's a series of work and there are lots of images, and this was kind of like a last minute, like, oh, let me just do this one instead of the ones that I normally will submit. But so this one, Pink Resonance, is a means of healing childhood emotional trauma in order to redress the unintentionally altered. Since I was a young girl, I've loved pink around the age of 7 or 8, maybe even younger. I remember dress shopping and falling in love with a light pink one. I was told that blue looks better on you. Sadly, I was denied the pink frock, and although small, that interaction sowed seeds of invalidation, which compounded with other exchanges over the years. not only crippled my belief in my voice, but also began producing self-doubt and self-deprecation, amongst other things. Furthermore, a disdain for the color blue and all of its forms instantly lodged itself within my psyche. Yes, I realized their colors. However, something bigger transpired, in my opinion, although fortuitous. I was disregarded, which I internalized as me being disregarded. So as children, when we experience the smallest dismissals, those interactions can inadvertently produce the deepest roots. This series has been a way of raising those roots in order to take back my voice and my power. Um, and then, let me see. And I was trying to, like, just with this series and with this color, I find a way, not I found a way, but I tend to kind of gravitate towards the color pink. So I was trying to unravel like the destructive and disruptive narratives that have come from, seeing a color and wanting a color, but then being told like when you were young and not really addressing those things that, you know, oh, this is better for you, instead of really realizing and understanding like your own mind. So this was a way of me being able to accept that. I know my own mind and I'm learning my own mind at the same time. So yeah, that was in essence why I did this series. And the model, she expressed different emotions, from the unseen to timidity, reflection, and then triumph. And I realized that no one is perfect and we are all works in progress. And I had to learn to be kind to myself. And, this was the start of healing. So, well, the continuation of the start of healing.
Yeah, nice. Really powerful background to this image. When I saw this, it felt very feminine to me with the flowers and the pink. So it's interesting that you weren't really able to tap into that femininity, it seems like, when you're younger, because of them saying that you needed to wear blue and you couldn't wear pink. So this image felt empowered and very feminine with the pink and the floral forms.
Thank you.
Yeah, this one is also printed at 32 inches. So in the gallery, we paired this one up with Josh's helicopter piece, because the colors from his piece and this one just look beautiful side by side. So I think you'll be pleased, Money.
I'm excited. I can't wait to see Josh's image.
All right. This piece is by Murdy Cope, called Little Boxes, Little Boxes. So Murdy, you are up.
Thank you, Gail, for selecting this. And last year I got to visit Ireland, and this picture was taken in Ireland, in Cobham, Ireland. And when I saw it, and all the houses are pretty much alike and all different colors, it reminded me of the song that Joni Mitchell sang, little boxes, little boxes on a hillside, all made out of ticky-tacky. And there's a pink one and a yellow one and a blue one and a green one. And it just seemed to fit so well with that song that I wanted to take a picture of it. And I enjoy architectural photography too, but that's real different from what I usually take.
Yeah, this was amazing and striking with the colors that this neighborhood, this town has. It's kind of incredible how they have these different pastel and bold hues in their home. You don't really see a neighborhood like that so often. It seems like, I'm not sure what their demeanor is like over there, but it seems like they're a happy community.
Yeah, I think they paint them different colors so that when they come home from the bars and um,
Oh, so they're drunk.
they don't go to the wrong house.
That's funny. That seems very Irish.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Marty. And last and certainly not least, we have Nikki Burke's piece, Autumn Light 5. So Nikki, would you like to tell us about this piece?
Hi, yes. Yeah, I'm really excited to be included in this show. This photograph, and it's part of a series that I shot while I was out walking my dog in the mornings. I live in Oregon right now, but I've only lived here for a few years. I spent the last like 20 odd years before that in Florida. So one thing I really miss is the light and like the heat. It's really gray and rainy here in Oregon. So on days when it's sunny like this, I just absolutely love going outside and this is a film image taken with a Holga on medium format film. And technically just, making it, I just don't advance the film all the way and kind of overlap it. And what I was trying to go for is that, that feeling when you look at light and it just blinds you for a second. And then when you open your eyes, you kind of see the shapes like repeating. It's like a little bit chaotic for a second. And then, it sorts, it calms down. But for me, like that's what I was trying to create because I really miss that, the feeling of light and warmth and sun. But shooting this way, like with a Holga, you can't really see what you're doing. You don't look through the viewfinder. I mean, you do, but you don't exactly get what you are seeing. So I don't really bother. But I kind of like the way that shooting blind also kind of, it's like replicating that, that feeling of being blind, for a second when you're like trying to regain your sight after you've looked into that bright light. So anyway, that's what I was thinking about when I made this picture.
Very cool. I would have thought that this was more of or this was a digital image and not analog. So I have a lot of respect for you sticking to the analog process. I'm sure that's not easy to have this technique come through. And this image I thought was compelling because it feels very much like a dreamscape with the light and this like double exposure and even the vantage point kind of looking upwards, it seems. So I thought it was really beautiful, and I thought the technique you used was cool to see.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Well, so with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. And we are going to open up the floor. So I'll lead off here with a question by Kaylin. Says, with having to build visual stories daily, I'm curious how your process for building a show is different or how it's similar.
Yeah, I would say when I'm working on a story, when I'm at work working on an article, I have to oftentimes make a lot of concessions and more compromises. And when you're curating a show or when you're going through submissions for an award, you have more freedom to make all the choices you love, which is the best part of my job. I think the hardest part of my job is probably to have to talk to editors and justify why we should use an image that I love that they may not love as much because text editors and reporters tend to be very literal and you just have to make concessions to move the story forward, which I understand. Sometimes it's so hard to let images go, but you have to do that. And when it comes to a show or for some sort of award, you can just choose really what you love and you have more creative freedom, I would say, less limitation. And then similar, I mean, still the work is you still wanna just think about how images work together and am I selecting too many abstract images? Do I have enough people in here? You want to see them as a group and you want to think about sequencing, which is more of like what David was doing when he was curating the selections, but that's also something that I think about in both cases.
And a question here from Jenny Lynn. Um, Well, when you hire someone to photograph and the images involve people, does the photographer also need to provide a photo release?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. So at The Guardian, we oftentimes, or most always, we don't unless they're children. But for when I worked at National Geographic, and usually when you work for a magazine, you really require the photographers to have releases of the people that they photograph. From what I understood when I was at Nat Geo, a lot of the times you ask for those releases because if that image ends up on the cover, you'll need a model release. So there's always cover potential. But because at The Guardian, it's a digital operation or a news operation, there's not that. And it's also British, so there's different laws there too. So I don't ask for model releases unless it's children, and usually we're photographing at schools, so we rely on the school's just overarching release and the school's um, permission that they receive from the parents. So I'm not sending out releases at The Guardian, but that's so much of what I did at Nat Geo. I think there's just different uh, there's like print and magazine and kind of longer form stories where they expect that you can get a model release, and then they expect that there's cover potential. And at The Guardian, there isn't that same expectation because of the news value, because it's a digital operation in the US, and also it's different expectations. Probably because it's British. But I know the magazine in the UK, the Guardian magazine, they require model releases because of that cover potential as well. It's like an advertising thing. I wish I knew more about the law, but long answer short, um, not at the Guardian, but elsewhere you do.
Thank you.
A question from Money wanting to know, how does someone get the opportunity to do a portfolio review with you? Is it something that you're doing through the channels like Filter Photo or Los Angeles, or where you're participating in kind of formal portfolio reviews, or is it something that you do separately on your own?
Yeah, so usually I'll work with an organization to do portfolio reviews, like Review Santa Fe and the New York Portfolio Review, or the Diversify Portfolio Review. So yeah, I'll partner with organizations that reach out to editors and galleries and to other photo producers who asked us to volunteer our time to review portfolios with photographers. I also work with like the PH Museum as an organization to review photographers' portfolios and to have one-on-one meetings to help them um, curate and sequence projects or help them with their website as well.
And if anybody else has a question, you don't have to type it into there if you want to. I'm happy to read the questions for anybody that wants to do that. But if you just want to speak up and ask, you're also welcome to do that.
Yeah,
Or if you have I'm sorry, I was also going to say, if you have questions of any of the artists about their work that they showed tonight, feel free to do that also. So yes, Jenny Lynn?
I had another question about when you're hiring someone and you're receiving images back from them, are you asking them to edit those images down, or are you wanting to see everything? Like I've known a few photographers over the years that just, hand off the card or the roll of film back in the day or whatever, and they don't really even barely look at their own photos. But what's the modern version of that?
Yeah, so the modern version is we move way too quickly and we are covering way too many stories for us to go through your entire take. So usually I'll ask photographers to send a selection of their work. That could be a tight edit of their work. For example, if they are on a portrait assignment and they're photographing someone in their home, I am okay with them sending me like 10 to 15 images of their strongest portraits. But if they're on a 3-day assignment covering multiple communities, multiple people, 10 to 15 images are not enough. So I'd want a wider edit. So it really depends on the stories, but I am not going through every single frame that they've made. There's just not enough time. So I expect them to make their best selects. Sometimes I'll go back to photographers if there is an image that we're needing for the story to double check if they have that frame. Sometimes I might see like one image might be close and I'll just ask them like, do you have any more in this sequence? So sometimes I'll go back to photographers for alternative images because photographers aren't always their best editors. But always asking for a selection. And then there's one more point I wanted to make. Oh yeah, if I'm working with a first-time contributor, usually I'll ask for a wider edit just so I can understand how they work and how they see. Because again, I think photographers aren't always the best editors, and that's okay. And I don't think you need, I think you just become just desensitized to your own work, and that's what editors are here for. I will say when I was at Nat Geo, we did go through every single frame, which is a very old school way of editing down. And by the time I left, they're kind of like being more lenient and shifting their practices a little bit. But Nat Geo, I think, was the place that really instilled in me that photographers aren't the best editors. So they wanted to go through every single frame. And sometimes that was 30,000, 60,000 images. You're just flipping through all of them. But even with that, the photographers will send like a tight edit of their tone select. So we'd know what their edit was, but then we'd go through all of their images and then see if there is overlap or see if there's any outliers that we had. But I think Nat Geo is not always the most trustworthy of the photographers, or a little bit harder on the photographers. But there's also just the time for that because stories would take a year, 2 years to do. So we could go through every single frame if we needed to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's so interesting that you have the experience working in both places and that to draw on. But yeah, I think it's I think I know myself as a photographer, it can be hard sometimes to step outside of your work and see it through someone else's eyes. So the role of an editor is really valued in my realm. Thank you.
We're a little bit past the 8:30 mark here, and I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. So unless someone has a burning desire, a question they just absolutely need to get in, do we have anybody with any last minute questions they'd like to get in before we wrap up for the evening? Yeah, I think you can tell from like going through the images like we have tonight that like what a really excellent show this is. And it just looks so good on the walls. When I'm laying out shows, sometimes I lay out everything kind of against the wall and on the floor. And I'm like, oh, I just don't know how I'm going to pair this up. And this just seemed to lay itself out. It was like, oh, this goes here and this goes here. And it's like, it was just, it came together. And after, the day after it went up on the wall, I came back in and looked at it and I was like, this looks so good. Not that I like, not my own work, but just it just the photographs just are in wonderful conversation with each other. So thank you so much, Gail, for putting together such a great show for us and for all of the artists who contributed their work. I think the public that's going to be coming through the gallery over the next 4 weeks is really going to enjoy seeing it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed going through all of your images. Congrats to all of you. I hope you guys get to see the show. David, I'm going to ask if you could send me a photo of the show. I'd love to see it on the wall. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get you some install shots, and I need to get install shots for the artists as well. So I hope to see as many of you that are here locally and that can make it. Hope to see you tomorrow night in the gallery from 7 to 9. And with that, we'll
Thank
let you
you.
get on with the rest of your evening. And so thank you for your time.
Thanks,
Thank
Gail.
you
Thanks,
as
David.
well.
Thank you, Gail.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you, Gail.
Good
Thank you,
night.
David.